Are you sure?
Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never ask a bride why she's getting married. Don't wear a skirt on a windy day. Deodorant is not a shower. Don't sniff chili flakes. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
They called him Dr. Baloch, the man in the white coat who was waiting for his patient at the pulpit of the mosque. 14-year-old Muhammad Dawood, accused of stealing from a shop till, was dragged forward. Then his wrist was snapped in two, so Dr. Baloch could saw through the flesh and bone easier. Later, before the doctor returned to the clinic in the bazaar, he held up Dawood's severed hand so the audience could see justice had been done. In the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, justice was always illuminated by the infinite light of God's laws. Later, in the football stadium nearby, where women had first appeared in Western attire in 1969, journalist Tim Boniadi recalls, punishments would be carried out at half-time as vendors sold tea and pistachios to the crowd. The first to be shot dead was Zamira, mother of 7, daughter of Ghulam Haznat of Parwan, and alleged murderer of her husband. Following 9/11, the former First Lady of the United States, Laura Bush, vowed that the war on terror would dismantle organized violence against women in Afghanistan. The fight against terrorism is also a fight for the right and dignity of women, she said. Except, we all know it now isn't. Even as governments from the United States to India work to expand counter-terrorism with the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan and provide aid that is widely reported to be misappropriated by the Taliban, the Islamists who rule the country have begun their war on women again. The Islamic Emirate barred women from studying medicine last week on the back of other rules shutting them out of primary and secondary education, which have meant girls haven't attended class in well over 1100 days. Islamic Emirate leader Hibatullah Akhundzada has barred women not just from working, but also operating businesses, sitting in women-only cafes, taking taxis, looking towards men, even talking at a volume their voices might be heard by a man. The public whipping and execution of women who seek to escape oppressive marriages has resumed, with victims facing charges such as moral corruption, adultery, and sodomy. Laws like these nowhere in the world have been used with anything like this degree of savagery to oppress an entire gender. The world, it's becoming clear, couldn't care less. From her elegant palace, the Sarai-e-Gulistan, its exquisite facade decorated with foliated scrolls and bird motifs, Empress Halima would sometimes emerge on horseback, discarding her veil and wearing a Western-styled riding dress. She rode horses and trained her maidservants in military exercises, the Grand Dame of Afghan Studies, Nancy Hutch Dupre, recorded in a 1986 book. She had a keen interest in politics and went on numerous delicate missions to discuss politics between contending parties. Amir Abdul Rahman Khan, the so-called Iron King who made modern Afghanistan, made the first tentative steps towards gender justice during his rule from 1880 to 1901, ending the tribal custom of forcing widows to remarry their brothers-in-law. He granted the right to divorce and allowed women to inherit property. To the Emir, these were necessary tools to build a national culture distinct from tribal norms. Anthropologist Ashraf Ghani, yes, the same Ashraf Ghani who became Afghanistan's last elected president, demonstrates that local Sharia courts rarely introduced barbaric Taliban-style punishments even while adjudicating cases involving women. One Kamal Shah arrived at a Sharia court in 1986 to complain that his wife had eloped with another man by whom she had become pregnant. The case was settled without any whipping, flogging or gunshots, just an agreement to pay a fine of 60 rupees to the aggrieved husband. In another case, a father approached the court seeking a sum of 40 rupees from his daughter which he had paid to secure her divorce but was not given back after she married again and secured a bride price. The stoning did exist on the statute for crimes like adultery. Other cases excavated by Ghani show judges who handed it out capriciously were actually censured by the royal court and even ordered to pay compensation to their victims. Emir Habibullah Khan, who succeeded Abdur Rahman, continued his father's reforming work. Liberal politician and intellectual Mahmud Beg Tarzi, who returned home from exile in Syria during Amir Habibullah's time, persuaded the emir to set up Afghanistan's first colleges for girls, as well as an English medium school. This isn't to suggest the country had become a liberal democracy. The king's advisor, Sahibzada Abdul Latif, was brutally executed for apostasy, but incremental gains were being made. Furious at what they saw as Amir Habibullah's pro-British tendencies, his enemies succeeded in securing his assassination in 1919. Together with his queen, the highly educated and progressive Suraya Tarzi, Amir Amanullah responded to the assassination by seeking to deepen the pace of modernization. Tarzi, historian Huma Ahmed Ghosh writes, tore off her veil, as did other women of the court. Amanullah's sister founded the country's first hospital for women, and 15 young women students were sent to study in Turkey. The age of marriage was raised from 18 to 21, and polygamy was banned. Facing growing tribal anger over the imposition of military conscription, taxes, and an economic downturn, however, Amir Amanullah came under pressure. Though he crushed a revolt in Khost in 1925, the pro-women reforms were sacrificed and he was forced into exile. King Zahir Shah's long reign from 1933 to 1973 saw him move very cautiously on social issues, careful of the consequences of handing clerics and tribes emotional issues on which to oppose the regime. Women teachers, nurses, and doctors, however, began quietly emerging from Afghan educational institutions in the 1940s. Kabul University set up faculties of medicine, sciences, and humanities exclusively for women students. King Zahir Shah was deposed by his cousin, former Prime Minister Muhammad Dawood Khan, who set up a one-party republic. The new republic, however, continued to expand education for women. In 1959, the wives of Dawood Khan and other important government officials appeared unveiled on the viewing stand at the Independence Day ceremony, making clear they were committed to transforming the gender relationship. Leaders supported by Pakistan, like the Islamist Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, Ahmad Shah Massoud, and Burhanuddin Rabbani, made these social changes a centerpiece of their resistance to the regime. Kabul and other cities, anthropologist Julie Below writes, were perceived to be centers of sin and vice precisely because of the high visibility of educated, emancipated urban women. In the decades of the jihad that followed, two cities on either side of the Durand Line emerged as contrasting models for how women should be in Afghanistan. In Kabul, inspired by Soviet socialism, women occupied increasingly public roles with few restrictions on their attire, social behavior, or mores. In the jihadist-run camps around Peshawar, though, Pakistani military ruler General Muhammad Zia-ul Haq's Islamist conception of how women should be was rigidly imposed. In 1989, psychologist V.M. Mohadam records that orders were issued for women in the Peshawar camps not to wear perfume, noisy bangles, or Western clothes. Veils had to cover the body at all times, and clothes were not to be made of material which was soft or which rustled. Women were not to walk in the middle of the street or swing their hips. They were not to talk, laugh, or joke with strangers and foreigners. Even though it's very common for the gender apartheid in Afghanistan to be attributed to tribal backwardness or tradition, the truth is clearly much more complicated. For much of the 20th century, the country's leaders made the same complex accommodation and pushback with tradition that modernizing nationalists engaged in across our region. Left alone, the Afghanistan that had begun to emerge in the 1970s would more likely have not developed into a very different kind of country. For women, as greater numbers flowed into the cities, flawed, violent, and patriarchal, but with some hard-won, meaningful gains. Afghanistan was, however, not left alone. The worst kind of Islamist reactionaries were empowered by the intelligence services of countries like the United States and the Soviet Union, unraveling the fragile social gains of a century. Today, after a 2 decade war that was marketed as laying the foundations for a democratic new Afghanistan, its women have been betrayed again. Their most basic human rights just don't matter enough for the world to care. The erasure of the rights of an entire population will rank as one of the most shameful crimes of our time. I'm Praveen Swami and I'm a contributing editor to The Print. Thank you for watching this episode of Security Code.